Welcome into the annual, not sure how many it's been, but it's the Over Under podcast. John Bauman, producer John, you see on your screen now, has set all this up. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Taylor Vippolis, Buck Sanders, Greg Barnes, Jason Staples, soon to be with us. Johnny T-shirt, JohnnyT-shirt.com, and Congruity. All right, fellas, let's get into it. Buck, tell everybody why we're here, and tell everybody why this has been such great insight to the season every year from all of us. It just seems like we nail it every year, and I'm not being totally serious.
Yeah, I don't think you are, Tommy. I think it's a good way to go through different aspects of the game that we're going to see this year, and to have six knuckleheads express their opinions about it. And we've got this year the comment section right next to us that can tell us whether we're right or wrong as we go, so that's good. It's just a fun thing to do and a way to get the season kicked off.
Yeah, indeed. It feels like when we do this, the season is right around the corner, and of course it is this year. Just for planning purposes, folks that are watching, I think we're going to try to do the win-loss prediction show next Monday night. To be determined totally. Everybody needs to agree, and like Buck says, getting everybody on the same page. But next Monday night. But let's get into it, John. Call it up.
We're all doing percentages this year, right?
You can do percentages.
Oh, here we go. Here we go with the percentages.
Buck,
Yes.
Buck, where's your? Don't you have an hourglass, Buck?
I do. I have a very big one, a new one.
Okay, just
So you can even keep an eye on it back here if you want to.
So somebody asked.
I don't think it's big enough for me, but.
Oh, okay.
We're not going down that road already out of the gate. So in case you're new to this, in case you're one of the 100-plus people already in here and you're new to this, John Bauman put together a thread on the message boards, had people submit over-unders. So we took over-unders from a variety of message board posters. Here's the board. First up, so what we're going to do is one person's going to take the lead and discuss this. I'll take the first one. Everybody else is just going to give their over-under so we can speed it along. If anybody has some extra comments to add, certainly get in. But I'm going to start this show with the Gregory Hall honorary Des Evans sack over-under. We have moved it up to 2. I'm going to start this off, even though Buck's in first place there. I'm going to start it. And I'm going to go over Des Evans. He has looked like a completely different person in the preseason. And I think Geoff Collins will have Des Evans more over 2 sacks. Buck, you're up.
I agree. He had 3 last year, so.
All right, Jason.
Give me the over.
Taylor Vippolis. Taylor's been a little down these last few weeks getting ready for this football season. We're going to get him fired up here. Taylor, what you say about Des Evans?
If this number doesn't hit, I think that's a massive disappointment. So I would take the over.
All right, Greg, what you got?
Okay, look. Des Evans has played in 42 games, right? And he has 7.5 tackles for loss in those 42 games. He's got 3 sacks against Power 5 teams in his career. So I understand the desire to go over 2. And I also agree that it would be a shame if it's not over 2. But I also think that there's another person who's going to get the majority of snaps at his position. So I'm going to go – can I go push or do I have to go over under?
Yes, you are the legendary Greg Barnes. You can push.
All right, let's push.
John B., what you got?
Well, I'm glad we've mentioned Gregory Hall off the top here. This is, of course, in honor of him. I believe he predicted, 14 sacks
It
for
was
Des
10.
Evans.
It was 10. And that was 3 years ago, and we're still working on it.
It was a big number. So this is in honor of our friend Gregory. I'm going to go with the over here on Des Evans. 2 is a low number for his production and his experience. But that brings us to a very interesting second number here, the second row. I want to give a shout out as well to this one, who it was provided by. This one was from RVA Heels 008 on the message board, who gave us this number. Bo Atkinson sacks at 4.5. Myself, I'm going under. Tommy, I'll kick it to you. What's your pick for this one?
4.5 seems high. I do like Bo Atkinson. He is a beast on college football. 25 for me in my dynasty, but I'm gonna go under 4.5 sacks for Atkinson. I think he'll have some halves with maybe Kamen Rucker, so I'm gonna go under 4.5 for Bo Atkinson. You want me to lead it? I say we just go down the list just to keep it simple. So, Buck, you're up on Bo.
I'm going to go over. He had 3.5 last year, and some of those sacks came against good teams. So I think he can do a little better this year. So I'm going over.
Jason Staples.
So just to go back to Gregory Hall for a moment, we're still working on 10 career sacks for Des Evans, aren't we?
Yes.
Indeed. Greg Barnes has those at his fingertips.
Yeah,
So
he's got
so here's the
4
real
total,
question.
3 against Power 5.
So, the real question is he going to hit the prediction of 10 in career?
We should have added that.
Anyhow, yeah, we can add that one at the end maybe. In any case, Bo Atkinson, I'm going to go. That's a really, really good number. I think he's going to have more snaps this year, and I think the schedule is going to set up a little bit better for them on that. I'm going to go with over for that as well. Boy, that one's a really hard one for me.
Taylor.
I'm going to take the over here. I'm kind of buying on – I would buy on any of the D-line guys just because you replace Tim Cross, you get a new defensive line coach. I think a lot of Carolina's hope this year is that the defensive line coach can kind of see some of these guys live up to their potential. So I would take the over on Bo Atkinson. And going back to Des Evans, 2 sacks for him for a 5-star prospect for everything that he was kind of supposed to be going into Carolina. 2 for a Power 5 defensive end. That's like a broken clock works twice a day. He's just got to hit that number.
Yeah, I remember the fallout when I forget the guy's name from 24/7 dropped Dez from a 5-star to a 4-star. Remember those times? Those were interesting times. But Dez, if you're listening, I say you're going way over. And to Jason's point, you're going to eclipse the 10 career sacks this year. I don't need that man chasing after me.
Tommy's drinking the Kool-Aid after watching a couple open practices here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Greg Barnes, Mr. Push It. What you got for Bo Atkinson?
It's hard to push 4.5, isn't it?
Not the way they keep them.
And you get half sacks.
This is true. If you look at the PFF numbers last year, the best pass rusher on the team was Kamon Rucker. The number 2 guy in terms of defensive line was Bo Atkinson. I think he really flashed last year, and I think he's poised for a kind of a breakout season. I think he needs it if North Carolina's defense is to bounce back and become better than average, right? I mean, try to be a top 50 defense is going to be on him to assist and complement what Kamon Rucker does on the other side. So I've got an over here.
There you go, Greg Barnes getting a little bit of Kool-Aid in there.
Tommy, the real question with the defensive line is how many games will Carolina know the other team's snap counts? Because that South Carolina game last year inflated a lot of the defensive numbers, and I think that game kind of threw off a lot of people's perspective with the defensive line, where everybody was kind of like, "Oh my God, is this the new defense?" And then it comes out that they knew a lot of what South Carolina was going to be doing.
That was interesting. I remember doing a day after podcast in the hotel at the Westin in Charlotte after that game. And it was an interesting discussion we had and expectations how they went through the roof before that. But Taylor, this is Positivity Pod. We're being positive here, and now we're getting where the rubber hits the road. Jason, you and I have talked about this a lot. I'm going to get Buck in here to start it off. Over under 6 starts for Max Johnson, the Texas A&M by way of Louisville transfer. Over under 6 starts. North Carolina scheduled to play 12 games at least. But what you think?
You and Jason's stuff, and it looks like he's going to win the job. And he had 8 starts last year at Texas A&M. So if he can start 8 games at Texas A&M last year, I don't see why he can't do more than 6 at UNC.
Here you go, Jason. This is wheelhouse territory. You're up.
I'm going to go over. I would have been, I think, prior to coming into the fall and seeing the open practices, this would have been close to a push for me. But I think it's going to be an over. The only real question here for me is Max Johnson has not been able to stay healthy so far in his career, through a full season. So, that's the thing that gives me pause. But ultimately, I've got to go with the over here.
Taylor Vippolis.
I'm taking the over. I think Max Johnson is the guy to beat in that quarterback room. And like one of the videos I did, it's easy to forget that he was an SEC starting caliber quarterback because of how long ago the LSU season kind of seems, and Carolina isn't asking him to go into Alabama or Ole Miss to win games. So I do think Max Johnson kind of has the leg up.
Greg.
Yeah, I'm going to go over as well, but it's close. I think there's going to be a little bit of a competition here as we get into the season. I think this is the first time that we've seen a North Carolina team under Mack Brown have the potential for a legitimate quarterback competition. And Max has got to perform well. And I think the schedule helps him more than anything because North Carolina, as they start the season, there's a lot of games there that they should win comfortably. And I think that'll kind of get him over the hump in terms of starts.
Yeah. I'll be honest. I believe injury-free, he starts them all. But to the injury factor, that's been an issue. And football is not a kind sport for somebody that has shown propensity to get injured. So I'm going to go over here, barring the unforeseen and the unspoken. John, what you got?
I will go over as well. I will take the Connor Harrell under. I assume, is everyone taking the Connor Harrell under? Any people going against the grain there? Or should we just go ahead and fill that as an under for everyone?
It's an interesting discussion. They could play 13 games. So I don't know if it's forgiven.
I'm going under.
I'm going under as well.
Everybody under on Harrell's 6?
Yeah.
All right, we'll do that.
My comment on the under for Harrell and really both of these two, the state of UNC football in 2024. Last year, the over-under was Drake May Heisman placement. I think we had it at 5th place. And here we are a year later, and we're debating number of starts. So I think that's a good way to encapsulate the uncertainty at the quarterback position compared to last year. Tommy, should we jump down to Hampton? Maybe we can put these together as well.
Just for clarity here, are we talking regular season or are we talking about, including postseason exhibition games and or playoff games, et cetera?
We had this very same discussion last year, and I can't remember anybody remember. If you're in the chat, anybody remember what we did?
I think it needs to be the entire season.
The entire season.
Everything. Because last year, the reason we have 1,500 beside his name now is because of the entire season last year.
Accurate. Yeah. I say.
Okay. That sounds good to me.
All right. So we're all on the same page, and everybody watching, this is the entirety of the season, 12-plus games. Omarion Hampton.
And we did regular season last year.
we're doing the whole. We're going the whole season. What it's going to say when it says the 2024
But we're
cumulative
good.
stats, we're going to go what it says. Buck, I'm going to bring you in here. You're leading the way here. Over, under 1,500 rush yards for Omarion Hampton. That's a big number.
And I'm going under on it too, Tommy. And that might not sound right, but I think he's not going to get all of the carries this year. He virtually got every carry last year. And I think they're going to try to probably split that up a little bit this year and give some other people some carries. And so far through training camp, all of those guys are healthy. So I'm going with the under. And I also think he'll be featured more in the passing game as well than he was last year. So I'm going that direction.
Got a lot of comments coming from the chat. What do you got, Jason? Over under on Hampton?
Way under. Yeah, way under. I mean, I think this is an enormous number. I mean, last year, like Buck said, he got virtually every carry after week one, and still was at 1504 in the numbers I'm looking at here. I just don't think he's going to get anywhere near the carries. And also, as someone commented, sorry, I didn't see who it was, but he's very unlikely to play in the postseason exhibition game too.
That's accurate.
I mean, I think this number honestly should be closer to 1,200. I mean, I would be surprised if any of us are going to go over on this. I think 1,200, maybe even 1,100, make this a closer number.
I tend to agree with that. Taylor, what you got?
I am going under. I think one of the benefits he had last year, besides everything that people have kind of mentioned already, being the only guy in that backfield for the most part, is that he had a quarterback like Drake May to take a lot of that pressure off. So I think a lot of defenses are going to go into games with him atop the scouting report, and that's going to force some of these quarterbacks to beat them instead of somebody like Hampton. So I would go under.
All right, Greg, before you go, do we drop the number to 1,400 and everybody's still under?
I would be.
I think you'd have to drop it to 1,200 before I'd even start thinking about the over.
Okay, let's go to 1,300. Is everybody still under on 13? Because I might be
I'm under.
shaky there. Greg, go ahead on 1,300.
Yeah, I'm under, and I think everybody has kind of been on point thus far in terms of comments. I mean, I think the great example is App State, right? Last year, where Omarion Hampton had 234 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns, and after the game, even Shipp was like, well, they were trying to do everything they could to protect against Drake May, and so you're trying to stop the passing game, and it's feast season for Omarion Hampton. Well, Drake May's not back there this year. And like Taylor said, there's going to be a lot of teams that say, okay, well, now we're worried about Hampton. He was good last year, but we had to really defend against Drake May. You've got a decent quarterback there, but nobody like Drake May. And so now the focus is on stopping Hampton. So I think that changes the equation quite dramatically. And if you look at the end of the year, I mean, West Virginia, look what they did, right? Drake May's not in the game. Hampton goes for 19 carries for 62 yards, 3.3 yards per carry. And then, of course, NC State kind of shut him down, although State jumped out to a big lead. So I think it's going to be a challenging year for Hampton. I think it's going to be a good year for him. He's going to prepare him for the NFL, but I don't think he'll have near the success that he had last year.
Yeah, I'm going to go under 1,300, but I think it's close to that. And I'm not going under because of Drake May's not there. I'm going under because Darwin Barlow's there. And I think Barlow is a good player. And I think they're going to get him a decent amount of snaps. And I know Schlegel in the chat mentioned Bullet or Goss. Barlow's going to play. And I'm on just shield for Inside Carolina's content. If you haven't watched the Darwin Barlow interview from the other day or read the article on the site, go check it out. I mean, that kid's got an opportunity to close his career as a college player, and I think he's going to perform. So I'm going to go under, but it's because Barlow's on the roster, and he's going to get significant snaps as well. John.
So let me
I wanna give
step in here, Tommy, for a second. What is the number that would have anybody going over on this? I'm just curious. So when you're done, John, I want to know what everybody's kind of push on this would be, because I kind of have a sense on mine.
I will go under, and I would say maybe 1150 yards would be the push number for me. Jason, what's your number that you had in mind?
950.
No way he doesn't get 1,000 yards. They will run him till the wheels come off. You can put under for me.
That's my push number is 950.
Interesting. You need to bold that one, and we'll come back and get that one later. I just think he's too good a back, and he's going to have to be used too much to be. Does anybody else agree with that? Let's have a quorum. Isn't that what you call it?
I'd say probably 1,100 would be a number where I'd really have a conversation one way or the other.
I'd say 1,100 too, but and I don't remember the specifics too much about this, but in 2015, Elijah Hood had 1,463 yards. It probably Taylor will remember the specifics of this better. I know he missed a few games, but in 2016 he had 868 yards. So there's a huge difference. I think T.J. Logan may be factored in a little more heavily in 2016, and I can't remember the specifics of it, but his numbers dropped off big time from 2015 to 2016.
And it wasn't because he was a worse back. I mean, I think this is something everybody needs to remember here. If he puts up 950 yards and he does it efficiently, that's a great season. And I think you're about as likely to see him go 950 and Darwin Barlow go 800 than you are him to go 1,200. Because I mean, again, Tommy, you know this, and Vip, you know this, Greg, you know this, Buck, you know this, John, you know how excited the people in the program are about the potential of Darwin Barlow and what he brings to the table as a guy that can help shoulder that load. And the thing you got to remember is if you are Omarion Hampton, you don't want to leave all your best carries in college. You appreciate the fact if you can go for 950 and your stablemate can go for 800, and that's because you guys are going 15 carries a game instead of 30, and that's another 15 carries per game. You can cash a check at the next level. You're happy about that.
It's a great point. It is 100% a great point. I really like Barlow. I really like Hampton. I'm putting mine at 1,100 for him, and I think Barlow can go. I'm not convinced. Somebody mentioned Goss. We can talk about Goss, but I think Barlow and Hampton are going to push 1,750, 1,800 yards combined. So anyway, here's another number that we can talk about, and this is one that's interesting. I don't know if it's too high or too low, but 16.5 total touchdowns for Hampton. I'm going to start at the back and go to the front. John, I'll start with you here on 16.5.
I'll give a shout out here. This number, the 16.5, was provided by TAS0417 on the message boards. Maybe, Tommy, that's your burner account. I'm not sure. So thanks, everyone, for submitting some of these numbers for us. You have to remember as well, total touchdowns. This includes both rushing and receiving. I'll go out on a limb. I have a feeling everyone's going to go under. I'll go out on a limb. I'll say over. At ACC Media Days, Omarion Hampton talked about Christian McCaffrey and the role that he plays on NFL offenses and sort of that pass catcher dynamic out of the backfield as a rusher as well, expanding his role. So I'm buying into a little bit of what Omarion is saying there, that he'll expand his role as a pass catcher. I believe he had one receiving touchdown last season. If that number goes up, it helps him maybe get the over on 16.5. Tommy?
First of all, I wish I had a burner account on those message boards. It would be so much fun. It would be hell for Ben and Buck and all the moderators, but it would be great. I'm going over. I'm going over on this for the reason is I think he'll be more of a pass catcher and he's going to steal a bunch of goal line touchdowns as well. And so over 1650, over 16.5 total touchdowns for Hampton. Taylor, you're up.
Yeah, I'm gonna take the over too. Actually, I think he's still one of the best backs in the country, and when Carolina gets in the red zone, I think there's going to be less of a reliance of wanting to put the ball in whoever the quarterback's hand is, knowing that you have somebody like Omarion Hampton. The offensive line is a large unknown, but what they do have is size, and I think they can move a lot of people around. And then when you look at some of the teams Carolina is playing early in the season, Charlotte, NC Central, James Madison, a lot of those teams are teams where Carolina does have the opportunity to run up some scores. And when you're running up some scores, somebody has to score those touchdowns. And I would guess it's going to be the best player on this Carolina team.
Greg, my bad. I skipped you there. What you got?
Well, I think it's one of the more surprising stats from last year is that with Drake May and with Omarion Hampton rushing for over 1,500 yards, Carolina was not better in the red zone scoring touchdowns than they were. They ranked 64th nationally at 61%. That was actually worse than 22 when everybody was kind of upset about how poorly Phil Longo had done in the red zone. So last year even took a step back. So I think that's going to improve. And so, it's kind of an interesting dynamic. I don't necessarily think Hampton's going to have as big of games in terms of total yardage as he maybe had last year, but I think he's going to be more efficient. I think the offensive line has a chance now that they have some new pieces. There's another level of toughness there that they're going to be better in terms of getting the yards when everybody knows they need to get yards. That's the one thing Mack Brown has talked a lot about. I think Hampton is going to help in that. And because of that, I think he's going to have more success scoring the ball on the ground. I agree. I think he's going to have a little bit more success in the passing game as well. So I've got over here.
All right. Jason, over under 16.5 total.
So ditto everything that Vip and Greg just said. I'm going to go with the over here. Last year, just for the record, Drake May had 24 passing touchdowns and 9 rushing touchdowns. I think this year, some of those rushing touchdowns are going to go to Omarion Hampton, and especially what Vip said about somebody's going to have to score the touchdowns in those first 4 games, and especially the 2, 3, and 4. You look at that schedule there against Charlotte, NC Central, and James Madison, and if there's one thing I do expect in terms of the sharing the load aspect of what they're doing for these running backs, they're going to share the carries a bunch, but when it comes down to the goal line, I think they're going to end up handing it off to Omarion Hampton more often than not as the guy who has been in the program longer. And if they're going to try to push anybody for postseason accolades and all that, it's going to be Hampton, and I think they're going to do that with some touchdowns, sort of feeding him the rock inside the red zone. So, I wouldn't be surprised if he's, pushing 8 touchdowns, 9 touchdowns by the end of the first month. And at that point, then he's got a lot. As long as he stays healthy, I think he hits this number.
Can dig it. Buck, go ahead and get the 16.5 and then get the 6.5 100-yard games for Hampton.
Well, I'm going to go over without further comment on the total TDs. And on the 100-yard games, I think, and the person that asked this, that was TAS 0417 too, wasn't it, John?
The 100-yard games was UNC 76. One of our.
It's a great question. I think that's right on the bubble. He had 7 last year, I think. But I think also there's going to be times where he's going to eat, and sometimes where he will not play as much against some of the other teams. I can't see them playing him, giving him 25 carries against Charlotte. So I think he'll get 7 100-yard games, but I think it'd just be 7.
What you got, Jason, here?
I'm counting them right now. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go under. I think he has 3 at the end of the first month, and he had 7 last year, and I think he's going to go under. I think this number is probably closer to 4 or 5 for me.
Taylor Vipp.
He might get. I'm seeing somebody saying he might need 14 to 15 carries to get 100 yards. This is Slagle. He might only need 14, 15 to get 100. He might need 7 in one of those games. 8 carries to go over 100. I think that's going to be the kind of game he'll have against one of those teams, and he might not get more than that.
Yeah, I was going to say he probably won't need double-digit snaps to get 100 yards against some of those teams with the lanes that the offensive line can provide for him, and then he can kind of do the rest. But I would take the under on the total season of 6.5, the under.
Greg Barnes.
I agree with that. I think the fact that he's got the breakaway speed that we saw, especially against Clemson, just really impressive. And so for a guy like that, I think with an offensive line that they feel we're going to be a little bit better than it was last year. I think he may not have the massive numbers like what we saw against App State, rushing for over 200 yards. But if he gets 20 carries a game, which I know he didn't get last year, but say he gets 20 carries a game, that's 5 yards per carry, which I think we can all agree. If he's only averaging 5 yards per carry, that's going to be a problem. So I've got him over. I think he'll probably go 7 or 8.
Yeah, I'm taking the over 2 for what you mentioned, Greg, and I think that shocked a lot of people last year. Is he can fly when he gets in the open field, and Nate Wiggins might run him down, but there ain't too many other people were doing that. And a 60-yard run gets you pretty close to 100 yards already out of the gate. I think he's got several of those in him. I'm going over 6.5. I'll go like maybe 8, maybe 9 100-yard games for him. John B., close out the first section.
Why was everybody surprised at how fast he is? He ran 10.9 and 22.4 in high school in the 100 meters and 200 meters. Those are really fast times.
Yeah, I was not, but I think because of the way his freshman year went, where he would have his head down and he'd run himself into the ground, people thought he was slow or plodding or whatever.
It's also not usual to see somebody that big be that fast.
Yeah. And, he can scoot, and he showed it a lot. And he showed it was Georgia State freshman year, and folks still doubted it a little bit. But, Jason, to your point, he could fly in high school, still can. John, what's your take here?
I'm going with the under here. Tommy, that was in your backyard, right? At Clayton High School. So
Cleveland High School,
sorry,
in Clayton.
I
Don't make that mistake around here as folks over there in Cleveland get tired of it.
I think I actually put the wrong high school in the GPS one time, and we went to the wrong school trying to go watch him play. Tommy, do we want to get an ad break in?
Yeah, you want to do Johnny T-shirt for me? You haven't done it in a while, but you can do it. You got
We've
this.
got a lot of freshmen coming into Chapel Hill this week to move into campus. If you're just starting school, maybe you're coming back for another year on campus as an upperclassman, it's a great time to visit Johnny T-shirt, get some more gear to celebrate your love of the Tar Heels. Support Johnny T-shirt because they support us. They sponsor this show and all of the podcasts that Inside Carolina does. Premium subscribers also get an extra discount, so make sure to pass that along anytime you're shopping at Johnny T-shirt. You can visit them on Franklin Street or online. Either works. They have some great selection, some awesome gear that you can use heading into the fall because that's right around the corner as well. So if you need to stock up on hoodies and the like, they have all of that for you. Thanks to Johnny T-shirt for sponsoring. Tommy, as you always say, we'll take a little break, let the national guys pay the bills. We'll be right back with more 2024 Over Under podcast ahead of the 2024 football season.
All right, that ad break is for those of you watching it, or listening on the podcast feeds. This will be up soon enough there, but we're going to keep rolling on the live show here. Got Greg Barnes, Buck Sanders, Jason Staples, Taylor Vippolis, John Bauman running the ship. I'm Tommy Ashley. It is the annual. How many times have we done this? This is 4? 3 or 4 or 5 of these? Anyway, the prediction show started with 12-0. I know that, and that was like 4 years ago. So anyway, it's a fun time for the chat. Get in the chat if you're not in it. Let us know what you're thinking. We're going to start now with some different ones. We're off the Hampton train. We're going to go with Jordan Shipp. And until this week, I would have said over here. So I'm going to go ahead and take mine on this. Over under 180 snaps for Jordan Shipp. I'm going to go under here. And Buck Sanders, I'll let you come in and get on this as well.
Well, I think it's important to point out that in the Mack Brown 2.0 era and under Lonnie Galloway, true freshmen have not gotten a lot of run at wide receiver in general. I mean, Josh Downs didn't play until like the bowl game. And look at the skill that he had. Embry Simmons had 4 catches. Bryson Nesbitt had 7. John Chapman had 7. There was a real surprising one in there to me was Kobe Paysour had 29. But freshman wide receivers don't get a lot of run, haven't to this point in Mack Brown 2.0. So I'm going to go under. The difference here, though, may be the lack of a true number 1 receiver. But I think our true number 1 receiver this year is going to be Bryson Nesbitt, is my opinion. So I'm going to go with the under here.
Under for Buck. Jason, your thoughts here on Shipp?
Everything Buck just said, including under.
Yeah, if you're listening in the live chat, what they just said is the answer to the question. Taylor, what you got here? And I'm freely admit, I think Jordan Shipp's going to be a really, really good player. But there's a lot of depth in that wide receiver room, and 180 snaps is a good chunk. I think it's still under for me. Taylor.
Yeah, disappointing to not go to me first as the only Providence Day guy in this group.
Atlanta.
But yeah,
yes.
it comes out. It comes out to about.
I saw you in there. You were getting fired up in there. I did not notice it. You're too small on the screen.
People forget Zaylot's JV basketball coach was right here. Gordon Sellers' JV basketball coach was right here, trying to start a PD pipeline to Carolina. But yeah, this number would come out to about 15 snaps per game, and I do think that's way too high. If Shipp is going to make an impact for this team this year, it would be towards the end of the season, and Carolina has a somewhat established group now. There's no real number 1 receiver between J.J. Jones, Blackwell, Kobe Paysour, Nate McCullum, but they do have enough experience together collectively as a group to kind of bridge the gap until Shipp is ready. Because I think when you look in that receiver room, he does have the best profile to eventually be that number 1 receiver. But to think he's going to get 15 snaps right out of the gate per game, I do think that is a bit much. I think the number would be better if you cut it. I even think cutting the number in half is still a bit ambitious for a true freshman receiver.
Interesting take there, Greg.
Yeah, I think the only way that he hits this number is if we're counting special team snaps, because I imagine he'll probably get some run there. I agree with everything that's been said, and to Buck's point, looking last year, there were eight receiver types that had more than 180 snaps last year, and 3 of them were tight ends. And I think the fact that the majority of those guys are coming back It's just going to make it a challenge. And he's exactly right. Buck's exactly right about Lonnie Galloway's preference to really wait until he completely trusts a freshman to play him. We've seen it time and time again. And so I agree on the under.
John B., your thoughts here, and then lead us to the next one.
I'll give a shout out. This one was provided by Rashawn 1000. He put the number at 180 for us. This is a popular one that we've done in years past. We've done Zach Rice. We've done Travis Shaw snaps around the 180 number before. I think this one is an under as well for all the reasons outlined. Tommy, I can swing around the horn here and set this one up. This over-under was provided to us by Smoke Pants on the message board. So shout out to Smoke Pants. This is an interesting number here. I had us North Carolina at 4 of these last year. I think with the strength of the tight end room in particular, I think North Carolina gets over this number. So I'm taking over. Tommy, what do you think?
I think one freshman will have more than 180 snaps. I'm doing the politician thing. I'm not answering your question yet. Aiden Banfield, he'll have more than 180. Just a thought. I'll go.
He'll have more than 500 if he stays healthy.
Yeah, I agree. I'll go over 3.5 400-yard receivers. I don't think there's going to be anybody that really has a huge number. If I had to pick one that had the most, it would be McCullum. But I'll go over 3.5 400-yard receivers / tight ends. Greg.
You know what? This is a good number, the 3.5. I'm going to go under because if you kind of look at North Carolina's history the last decade, there hasn't been many years where they've had more than 3. And the years that they have had more than 3, some of those have been their best offensive years. And I understand the idea of, well, maybe you don't have a stud, so you just really spread it out. Maybe, but I really think somebody has to pop for this offense to really flourish. You know you've got a good rush attack, but you need somebody to kind of separate and be your primary guy at wide receiver. It doesn't have to be a Josh Downs, Devontae Walker type, but I think you need to have somebody who kind of separates. And so because of that, I'm going under here.
All right, Jason, get in here. Like I said, I think Nate McCullum's the leading receiver on this team, but I still think there's enough to go around and not somebody taking a ton of it. There's no Josh Downs on this team that's going to take 75% of the targets, it felt like, at times. But Jason, get in.
I'm going to go with over, partly because I think this is going to be very much wide receiver by committee. And, they had 4 last year. I think they're going to wind up right at 4, maybe 5 this year with a lot of I think there's going to be some movement with a couple of the young guys like Billups, for example, starting to come on second half of the season who probably will push that over the top.
I'm going to go to Buck. I'm saving you, Taylor, for another reason. Buck, what you got here? Muted, Buck.
You ambushed me. I'm torn on this. This was a really good number by Smoke Pants here. It's a really good number. Because, as Greg alluded to, it's very rare that North Carolina has gone over 3. And the last 2 years under Drake May has been 2 of the only 2 years under Mack Brown that they've done it. But the other years, I think they kind of had a duo in play a lot of those years. So Diami and Dez, a couple of years there. So it's tough to call, but I'm going to go under because I think Drake May was maybe one of the better distributors of the football that I've seen. And I don't know that everybody has that ability to spread the ball around as well as Drake did. So I'm going to go under.
All right, Taylor, get in here as the only person on the panel to have played wide receiver at North Carolina. Speak to the wide receiver room.
Play it is generous.
I mean, you had a uniform. I've seen it hanging in IP3.
Shout out to my guys there. Yeah. I would take the over 3.5. I think when you're looking at this UNC depth chart, I would say Nesbitt and JJ Jones are almost a lock to get 400 yards health dependent. I think you're going to have Nate McCollum year 2 at Carolina be a lot more comfortable in Chapel Hill and around this team and being more involved in the offense without somebody like Tez Walker. And then you get Kobe Paysor back and healthy. And if he doesn't get hurt last year, he probably eclipses that mark pretty easily. 400 yards, it just doesn't really – I get the receiver by committee thing, but it really doesn't seem like a ton of yards in a 12-game season. And I do think that a lot of these guys for North Carolina, they might not have the flashiest players, but they do have some guys who do have that big play potential.
Yep. One last shout out to Smoke Pants. Probably the best number of the day on the show, submitted by everybody. Let's get into the defense. Defense. 11.5 interceptions by the defense. Over under. I'm going to go over, and I say Huzzy has 7 himself. Buck, over under 11.5 interceptions by this defense.
They've not gone under 12 interceptions in the Mack Brown era. So I'm going to say they're going over, and it's not going to be close. They're going to get probably closer to 15 than they are 11.5. That's my opinion.
Do we need to move this?
They had 11 last year, didn't they?
I got 12 is the number I'm looking at.
I'm looking at the Pro Football Focus number, and they've got 11. Interesting.
We'll keep it at 11.5. What you got, Jason?
Yeah. I'm going to go over. Being 12 would be right at what the average in the ACC has been for the last few years, basically, in a 12, 13 game season. So I think especially given a soft schedule early on, I think this will be over 11.5. This is a good number though.
Taylor Vip.
I would take the over, and when you hear new defensive coordinator Geoff Collins talk, a lot of the things that he's been preaching is wanting to create havoc. And if you're creating havoc and you're making life tougher for the quarterback instead of doing the bend but don't break approach when you get into the red zone, I think that's going to open the door for a lot of takeaway opportunities. And I do think Jason mentioned it, the soft schedule for North Carolina, when you do get these teams and you're forcing them to try to play catch up before the game can get completely out of control. When you're putting those quarterbacks in those kind of situations, you can see an escalation in the number of turnovers that they commit when they're trying to force things and get their teams back into the game. So I would take over an 11.5.
Greg Barnes.
Yeah, just to kind of flesh out some of the numbers. I mean, if you look at what North Carolina has done the last 15 years, they've averaged 11.9 interceptions, and that includes the fantastic fluke season in 2016 when Carolina did not have an interception against a Power 5 opponent all season. They had to rely on Dominic Green to have that 60-yard return against, I guess, the Citadel. To give them the one interception all season. That was fantastic. Good job, Gene. If you take that one out, it's 12.7 interceptions per season over the last 15. So I'm going over here just based on the numbers. And then when you factor in Geoff Collins, I think just the aggressiveness that he's going to be able to show is going to help boost that number up a little bit more.
Anybody feeling my Huzzy 7?
Sounds like a lot.
That's a big number.
No.
Not even close.
I think this might be Des Evans' 10 sacks territory.
Elijah Huzzy, if you're listening, I need you, buddy. These people have no faith in my predictions. We got to hit a big one at some point. John, what you got on the interception?
So everybody went over, by the way. I want to know what your number is if we all went over.
I think it's a good number. I think this is the second one in a row that the number is right there. Like you said, the average in the ACC is right about there. As I mentioned, Carolina's average last 15 is 11.9. So if you get 13 is probably, maybe I'm looking at under. So maybe 12.5 is probably the perfect number.
And John, I cut you off. So what would your number be? Because you already put the over on there.
I would go 13, maybe even 14 for all the reasons outlined, a more aggressive defense. Also, if you listen to Mack Brown, you listen to some of the talk out of training camp, they feel really good about what they have in the secondary, specifically at safety. That's been potentially a little bit of a weakness for the team over the last few seasons. If you can get some interceptions from that safety position, that could also change this math a little bit. And I want to give a shout out as well for this number. This was provided by, I'll get the exact name here, TAS0417. That's Slagle. So thank you, Slagle, for this excellent number. Apologize for calling you Tommy's burner account earlier. I looked through all of the list of the over-unders that were provided. There was a ton, so thank you, everyone. And Greg, I saw this one, and I knew we had to include it because this is the Greg special here. Final defensive FEI rank. For those viewers who are uneducated on this metric, can you explain to them what it is before we pick our over-unders?
Yep. So thank you, John. The FEI is my preferred measure for how productive a team is. And what it is it's per possession scoring advantage adjusted for opponent. So as Larry Fedora once told me, we can talk about yards per play. We can talk about explosive plays and efficiency. At the end of the day, you got to score points. And so what this measures is how good you are on each possession relative to the average opponent. And defensively, North Carolina has been horrible defensively in this stat, and then offensively they've been really good the last decade.
Describe horrible.
Oh. Okay, so here you go. The best ranking that North Carolina has in defensive FEI over the past decade is a Vic Koenig defense in 2013. That team was sneaky good defensively, but they were 39th. The best of the Mack Brown 2.0 era was back in 2019, where they were 61st under Jay Bateman's tenure.
Do you have any Geoff Collins numbers, how his defenses ranked out in this metric?
So his last four defenses as a defensive coordinator, both at Mississippi State and Florida, he was top 25 in this metric all 4 years. And we had this conversation on the message board, and I hesitate to mention it here. But NC State's had a top 20 defense in this statistical category 3 years in a row. And so that's, you can manage a lot of issues on special teams and on offense if you're good defensively. State has figured that out. And that's the one thing that has been lacking for North Carolina. And that's why everybody's kind of been scratching their heads, wondering why Carolina can't get over that double-digit hump.
Buck Sanders, get in here. You're big on the metrics and the numbers as well. So we're going over under 49.5 on the FEI rank. That means if you go over, that means they'll be 50 or higher. If you go under, it's 49 or lower. But where you see it.
This is kind of a heart and a head sort of deal for me here. But, like last year, I think the defensive FEI number was 74. Is that right, Greg? I think they were 74th in defensive FEI. So
right around there. Yep.
You got to move 25 spots or better to get into that range. That's a lot, and I'd like to think they can do it. I have some pause, so I want to flip a coin and say I'll take the under, but my percentage of confidence in that, to quote Jason Staples, is like 51%.
Perfect lead in to Jason Staples. Jason, where you got him?
This is a really good number. I'm pretty bullish about this defense on the whole coming into this season. More so than I've been at Carolina really since Mack got here. Uh, I've got I've got concerns. I've got concerns about how they're going to handle the running game and all of that. But I'm looking at the schedule and what teams are gonna be able to do, or what teams are bringing to the table. If they're not higher than 49, I think it's partly because the offenses that they're facing on the season are not actually very good, and so that may actually weigh them down when adjusted for opponent. But I'm going to go with over so just to clarify, over on this means they're going to be ranked better than 49 and a half, right?
The number is hot. The number is higher if you go
Then
over.
I'm going to go under. I'm going to go under. I think this is going to be real close. I think they're going to finish in the top 50. I don't think they'll finish higher than 40th or so. I think that's probably the range. They could, but they'd have to be better on the defensive interior than I think they've shown to be so far. And I think this is a pretty good number. I'm gonna give a little bit of a nod of faith to Geoff Collins and what they're doing defensively. I'm gonna go under, but barely.
Taylor, get in. This is where it's at for this team,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I'm gonna go over. I think one of my biggest worries watching or in the comments about this team from last year leading into this season was what the defense would look like without Cedric Gray. We're gonna kind of see that pretty early on, and that's gonna kind of be how I gauge the defense this season, how they're able to handle the loss of that unit's quarterback, and from all reports last year, he was like unbelievably critical to a defense, and that defense wasn't even that good. So you have the new defensive coordinator. You're trying to replace some leadership. I kind of just want to see this defense before I say that you're going to see a noticeable improvement.
But you saw them against South Carolina last year.
Yeah. I booked a flight to the college football playoff after that game.
Greg Barnes, get in there and save us from ourselves.
John, I don't know if it was you or Tommy that asked to kind of define how bad Carolina's defense had been relative to FEI, and I kind of gave you the best options in the last decade. I want to give you the worst before I answer this. If you go back to 2014, which I think a lot of us kind of circle as quite possibly the worst defense that Carolina has fielded in the last 30 years. I mean, some of those first Mack Brown defenses in 88, 89 were pretty bad, but that one was pretty bad. That was 112th. Go back 2 years ago to Gene's first year, 2022. They were 119th nationally.
Out of
131, I guess. Just abysmal. I'm kind of with Taylor here. I need to see it, and we talk about this a lot, guys. It really comes down to how good you are on the offensive line and the defensive line. And I am just going to have to see it on the defensive line. We know Kamon Rucker is a really good piece. I think there's potential there. I think Harris coming in really helps solidify the middle. But I am going to have to see it to see this defense make a significant jump. I agree with Jason. I think this number is really good. But I'm not quite ready to say this is a top 50 defense yet.
I can go with that. I trust Greg Barnes' judgment. I'm gonna think they're in the mid 50s, high 60s to the mid 50s. A couple things worry me. Taylor's point about Ced Gray not being there. Amari Campbell dinged up at least early. Yeah, I know it's early. He'll play or whatever. But for me, the defensive line we know's got to do it. I think the defensive backfield's going to be good. I've already said what I think Huzzy will do. I think Caleb Cost will be good back there, and I think Boykins as a safety is a plus move. I want to see one of these other linebackers, whether it's Ashton Woods or Caleb Lavalley or those guys, step up and make plays and be reliable enough that they can play, and we don't see guys running to the ground at the end of the season. I'm going to say over, but close. to quote Lee Corso. John, what you got?
I'm going over as well. Greg, I got thrown off a little bit from my game. You mentioned the 2014 defense, and I got flashbacks to 70 points against ECU, and that's been going through my head these last few moments here. So I think with that in mind, perhaps I have to go with the over. I want to set this one up here. 2.5 wins in November, just so everyone is aware. UNC plays 4 games in the month of November. We're not going to pick the games because we'll do that on next week's podcast, but they play Florida State, Wake Forest, Boston College, and NC State. Those are the 4 games in November. Kind of an interesting question here. We know that November and late season has haunted this team the last few years. Buck, we'll start with you on this one. 2.5 wins in November, over, under. What's your take?
I'm going to say under. And I'm going with the history. And the 2 best teams they play this year on paper are NC State and Florida State. So right there, that leaves you a road game at Boston College and Wake Forest, who always plays North Carolina tough. So I'm going to go under. I wish I would say differently, but that's where I'm at.
Jason, what you think? So just so to reiterate it for folks, we're talking about wins in November, over under 2.5, at FSU, Wake at home, at BC in November, and NC State in Kenan Stadium.
Under.
Taylor?
Under.
Greg?
Yeah, what Buck said, under.
I'll go under. John, you going? Nope, you're not going to break the streak. Okay, here, this is a good one, and this is another one of those good numbers. 3 road wins on the year, just so folks, if they're not looking at it, at Minnesota, at Duke, and people can talk about Wallace Wade all they want. 2 years ago, Wallace Wade was on fire. I assume it'll be the same. At Virginia, we know the history there. Again, at Florida State, at Boston College. So you've got, 5 chances. Over under 3 wins. Buck, I'll circle back to you first. 3 road wins, over under.
Why? Why do you come to me?
Because you're the head El Jefe, the leader
I'll do
of
it
the group,
first.
the president.
I'll go first. I'm confident.
Go ahead, Jason, please. Thank you.
So now you can piggyback on Jason, Buck.
I'll take
said.
the bullet. I'm going under.
What Jason said.
All right.
Yeah, I think this number probably had to be 2.5 to get people to even consider taking the over, because to basically win, you need Carolina to go 4-1 in their road game. So I would also go under 3 road wins.
Push is a really interesting option here, by the way.
I'm taking push. Push it. Greg, what you got?
I'm pushing it as well.
Can't go wrong being buddy with Greg Barnes. John B.
And Buck was an under on this one?
Buck was an under on that.
Have to think about the quarterback situation as well. You know, when you have a Drake May or even a Sam Howell and you're going into a hostile road environment, you feel pretty good about that position. You feel like Drake May can make them throws. What's the quarterback situation going to be like this year, bringing one of those guys into one of those hostile road environments? I'm going to go with the under here. I do think that is a good number, and I want to give a shout out for that one. That was Kill Devil 3, who had road wins on the year. Keep in mind as well, last year UNC had 1 road win.
I mean, you've got Minnesota. You got at Duke, which Duke's not going to be as good this year, but they're always a pain in the butt over there. Virginia, we know how it works there. At Florida State, who, by the way, in my dynasty, lost to Georgia Tech, lost to Duke, beat Florida State by 40.
The sim logic in the game is terrible.
I was playing that game. If I don't throw it to the other team, I'm good.
I've seen the FCS Pandas beat like Georgia.
And then at Boston College, in November. So
You're talking me into a push there, Tommy.
What you got? I
You're
can't
talking
believe
me
I can
into
talk
it.
Jason Staples into anything. All right. Here's where we are. Let's go through these quick. Over under 31.5 offensive points per game. Greg, I'm going to come to you first for some stats so we know what we're talking about here, comparative purposes. 31.5 over under offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really low number for today's style of play. I think if you go back, I mean, even 2021, which is a little bit of a disappointment for the offense, with average 35.2. If you go back to 2018, when Carolina did not have a quarterback, they averaged 27.4. So I think this number is a couple points too low. So I'm going over here.
Right,
I got a
Taylor,
question for you, Greg. Do you know what the number 3 scoring offense in the ACC averaged per game last year?
Not off the top of my head.
Do you know who the number 3 scoring offense in the ACC was?
Louisville.
Georgia Tech.
Miami Hurricanes.
Miami. Wow.
And they averaged 31.5 points per game, which was 3rd in the conference.
Wow. So where are you going? Over under, Jason? Speakless.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Again, the problem here is schedule. I think the Charlotte and NC Central games in particular are going to inflate some numbers there. But I'm going to go under.
Buck, can I call on you now? Is it okay to call on you?
I have to unmute myself first, but yes. I'm going to go over, and here's why. They play a few decent defenses. Florida State. I'm looking at the SP Plus numbers here is what I'm going by to judge the defense. These are their defensive rankings. Duke is fairly decent in the S&P Plus, but North Carolina plays some really crappy defenses next year. BC 72, Georgia Tech 99. Now I know Georgia Tech is Georgia Tech and the history there, but the number is 99 for Georgia Tech, 81 for Virginia, 127 for Charlotte, 73 for James Madison. Wake Forest is 59, and that's one of the better teams on the schedule. Boston College 72. I'm thinking they got to go over here because just the number of defenses that are just not very good that they're going to play. And as Greg was saying, 31.5, at least for North Carolina, has been low. They're going to want to light it up a lot more than that, and they're going to be looking for explosive plays. So I'm going with the over number here.
So, Tommy, just to reply to Jason here, I think the fact that Miami was 3rd in the ACC speaks to just how poorly the ACC played offense last year. There were 40 teams nationally that averaged 31.5 points per game last year. In 2022, there was 43. In 2021, there was 40 as well. So what we're talking about, is this going to be a team capable of ranking in the top 40 nationally in terms of offensive points per game? And if we're talking about an offense that's kind of outside that mark, I think it's going to be a difficult year.
I'll go over. I think they'll average 34.31 points per game. If Omarion Hampton's going to have more than 17 touchdowns by himself, Carolina's going to have more than 31 points a game. John B.
For me, this one is an under. I think that you also have to think about the style of games that North Carolina is going to be playing this season. Again, going back to what Mack Brown has been saying, they want to lean more on their defense They want to get stops. They're going to try to maybe slow the tempo down potentially, even if you're doing all those things, leaning on the defense. It's going to lead to a little bit less scoreboard lighting up than we've seen in recent years. And Taylor, do we miss you on this one? What's your take here, over, under on offensive points per game?
Yeah, I'm going to say under for the same reason that you just said, John, where I think North Carolina is going to try to shorten the games to win some of these toss-ups. I don't think there's – I think they're confident in their quarterback room, but I don't think there's a ton of confidence in their ability to go out and win you games when you have a running back duo like Hampton and Barlow. I think for this North Carolina team to have the most success, it's going to be leaning heavily on those two, which is why I do think those guys are going to get theirs. But overall, I would say that the offense is going to be – it's not going to be as high flying and fast paced as we've kind of come to see in years past.
That moves us along to possibly the second to the last thing here. I'm going to talk about congruity right fast before we do defensive points allowed. Congruity, as you see around the edge of our screen, sponsor of Inside Carolina, sponsored this podcast. Great customer service, great technology support. Darren and Matt, small business support. Go to congruityhr.com/Tar Heels. Get your small to mid-sized business assessment. Let their national business do what they did from the start. They were a local business, North Carolina, born and bred, blew up. National business. They can do it for you as well. congruityhr.com/Tar Heels. Go to that. Get your free assessment. If you like it, use it. Grow your business. If you don't like it, it's free because you're an Inside Carolina person. Congruity. And also shout out to Johnny T-shirt. Last one of the day, 26.5 points allowed by the defense. How many did they have last year, Greg? Just so I know.
Let's unmute here. Last year was
27.3.
27.3.
Okay.
30.8 in 2022, 32.1 in 2021, and 29.4 in 2020, and then going back to 2019, 23.7.
Which was good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Taylor Vippolis, since I've missed you a couple times, 26.5 defensive points allowed. Of course, Geoff Collins, new defensive coordinator. Has he lit a fire under this defense? You mentioned no Cedric Gray, but a lot of the other guys are stepping up. What you think?
I will take – I feel like I've contradicted myself a couple of these points because I do think Carolina is going to try to play a shorter game, but I also want to see the defense first. I'm going to say over, and it's going to be pretty close to that number, but I would go somewhere in the 27s.
All right, Buck Sanders.
Well, I'm going to go under because 27 is the exact same defense they had last year, and I think they'll be better this year. And I think part of that is I think the secondary is strong throughout the secondary. I don't think there's any weak spots back there that can bail out a quarterback. So I'm going under. Maybe not a lot under, but I think they'll beat that 26.5 number.
All right. This is a question I have. I'm going to do my pick here. But the FEI is based on opponent strength as well, correct?
Yes.
So, like, if you beat the hell out of Central and Charlotte, you don't get a ton of credit for that.
Correct. And the great example of that, Tommy, is if you go back to 2022, Carolina only allowed like 30 points per game. And if you remember back, Matt kind of pointed to that of, hey, they only gave up 28 points to Virginia. Well, Virginia was only scoring like 12 points a game against Power 5 opponents. But because their offense was so horrible, Carolina gave up 28, and you're like, oh, God, that's really bad. But if you look at just the number, it looked okay. So Carolina gave up 30 points a game in 2022, and they ranked 119th nationally. And that's just because their opponents were so bad offensively.
So you get no credit for beating up on cupcakes, or you get some, but not a ton.
Yeah.
I'm going over but very close. I'm going, and this is another thing, because you throw it to the wrong team and they return it for a touchdown. That counts against you. I'm going to go 27.5 points a game, so I'm going over 26.5. Greg and Jason. Jason, you go first, so you can't steal Greg's number.
I'm going to go under. I think there's a couple reasons for this. One is what Vip has been saying about slowing the game down. I think this is a North Carolina team that's going to run the ball a lot, and they're going to try to control the game with the running game and play. So I think this team is going to be a lot like the 2019 team, where if you remember going back to when Sam Howell was young, they weren't just slinging the ball all over the field. They were running the football a bunch and trying to win, on the margins and play pretty good defense. And the defense was okay, but it wasn't great, but they played well enough to get some wins out of that. I think this approach is going to be very similar to what they did there, shortening some games, and I think that's going to result in some better numbers. And just for perspective, that 2019 team gave up 23.7 points per game, which was the best in the Mack Brown era, Mack Brown 2.0. I think this team's going to be right in that same range, right around 24 points a game. The other reason for that is I look at this schedule and tell me which of these offenses is any good, right? Buck, you mentioned the defensive schedule of, these teams, their defenses are coming, the returning defenses, they weren't real good last year. I'm looking at the offenses. The defenses are a bunch of juggernauts compared to the offenses on this schedule. I mean, Minnesota last year was terrible. Now, I think they're going to be better than they were last year because of quarterback position. But Charlotte, NC Central, James Madison, you should be able to handle them defensively. Duke, I think, is going to take a step back offensively. Pitt's not been an offensive juggernaut in some time. I think Georgia Tech is probably the best team on offense, in that first half or right around the middle of the schedule. How good's UVA going to be on offense? I think Florida State probably, takes a little bit of a step back this year offensively after losing all their skill position players. I mean, almost every skill position player on their team is gone. They lost, they had one starting tight end return. Every other skill player that started for them is gone. They're going to be good on offense, but, how good are they going to be? And they don't have the kind of explosiveness they did last year, most likely, at least in the run game. Wake Forest, Boston College. I mean, essentially you play maybe three teams with a pulse offensively going into the year, at least, looking at it on paper, Georgia Tech, Florida State, and NC State. So I think that's why this number is actually pretty high. I think I'm pretty comfortable with 24 and even taking the under on 24 with how things are going to go.
All right. John, before Greg does, change mine to the under. Put an asterisk beside it because I was ham-fisted, or whatever you call it, to get me there. Greg, what you got?
Yeah, I agree with Jason here. And Tommy, you mentioned about FEI. I think this is going to be one of those years where this number is going to look really good, and maybe the FEI doesn't support it. And people may say, wait a minute, why don't those numbers match? And it's because of what Jason just said.
Yep.
If you look at Bill Connolly's projections for offense, like nobody's any good. Like Florida State and Georgia Tech are it. Like top 50 wise in terms of what Connolly has. Those are your two best offenses that Carolina's going to be playing. And then it's NC State and JMU. So, I mean, Charlotte's 119th projected, which is terrible.
But it's interesting. You just talked about Virginia and how Virginia scored 12 a game and Carolina gave up 28.
Correct.
But this is where the Geoff Collins effect comes in.
Right, and that's what I would encourage for sure. But I would also encourage listeners to, at the end of the year, as we get into November, really take a look. Okay, we knew Carolina held Charlotte to 14 points. Is that as impressive as it looks? Go look at what Charlotte did against other Power 5 opponents, or even Group of 5 opponents, and you can kind of gauge that way at how well the defense has actually played, and don't get sucked into, hey, well, they only gave up 21 points. Well, if the team is absolute trash, that's not that impressive. And so I'm going to go under here. I'm not as convinced as Jason that's going to be much below it, but I do think it's going to be in that 25-26 range.
All right, John B., you want to close us out on the last one? Unless we're going to do win totals, we'll save that for next week, though.
I don't feel I don't feel I should be having the last word here. I'll just play devil's advocate a little bit, and someone else can get in here too. We talk about bad offenses. Last year, UNC gave up 45 points, albeit in double overtime, to Duke's third-string quarterback, Grayson Loftus, and I don't think anybody's proclaiming him to be an excellent quarterback. So there's a balance there, I think, too, in terms of the offenses that the UNC will be playing, but also UNC has not had a track record of stopping those sorts of offenses last season at times over the last few years. I'm going with the over. That completes our board here. We didn't get a chance to do this at the start, but we have to give a shout out. Last year's champion was Greg. Greg, I think you got the most right in 2023 for over under. So we'll see who the champion is this year for 2024.
Do I win anything?
Just the recognition, just the kind words. I'm surprised Jason's not coming in here saying, but wait a minute.
I'm surprised for whatever it's worth.
No, Greg got us all last year.
I have to see the numbers.
Yeah. It's on the Google spreadsheet. We'll try to share this on the message boards as well so everybody can compare their notes to this. It's always fun to do it. I have a question. I have a final question for the group. Given the talent on defense, given everything that we've seen and heard about in practice, if it wasn't Geoff Collins and it was Gene Chizik, would your number at the bottom change?
Yes.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That, folks, is the Geoff Collins effect that I mentioned just a second ago. It's going to be different. This defense is going to be different, and we'll see how much different. It'll be interesting to watch. So we all agree next Monday we're going to do the prediction pod. Everybody in for that? Say aye.
Aye.
This is Sons of Anarchy Roundtable here. So join us next Monday night, 9 o'clock. We're going to do the season prediction podcast. The season is almost here, Carolina and Minnesota, in just a couple short weeks. If you're going to Minnesota, stay safe on the way up there. I'll see some of you guys there. If you're not going, make sure you stay tuned to Inside Carolina completely for all the coverage. Taylor, appreciate it. Buck, as always, appreciate it. Greg, Jason, and John Bauman, captain in the ship. It's kind of like, how did we get there? It's because John Bauman drove us. Producer John got us where we had to go. Much love to Johnny T-Shirt. Much love to Congruity. And most of all the love to the people that watched us and stuck with us for an hour and 23 minutes talking over-unders on the Inside Carolina podcast. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.